Live. Hello there. I'm Haslinda Amin, anchor and chief international correspondent for Southeast Asia for Bloomberg Television. Welcome to this special edition of Sooner Than You Think by Bloomberg Live. Today, we'll examine the crucial role technology is playing in this whole pandemic. But before we proceed, just a few housekeeping reminders. We're new to virtual events, as you can imagine, our first actually in Asia. So please do bear with the technical issues. If you're having trouble with your audio or your video quality, just refresh your browser. This is, of course, an interactive event, so we'd love to hear from you. Do send us your questions, and to do that, there is a Q&A box below the slide window. Put your question there, click submit, include your first name, your city, so we can give you a shout out if your question is picked. We'll also be doing some polling questions throughout the show, just to make sure that you're actually paying attention to the whole conversation. The poll questions will pop up on your screen. Do engage with us as well on Twitter. The hashtag is STYT. That's Sooner Than You Think. Hashtag STYT. Okay, before we get to our first guest, let's do the first polling question. You see that on your screen. The question is, which technology has been indispensable for you during the pandemic? A, is it video conferencing? B, food delivery? And C, telemedicine? Oh, we have 4. D is contactless payments. Oh, the choices are endless. It does seem like we have others as well. Video conferencing, food delivery, telemedicine, contactless payments, as well as others. Throughout the show, just do engage with us. Engage with those polling questions. We'll bring you the details slightly later. Now, let's get started. Most of us around the world are hunkering down at home. Here in the Lion City, the lockdown has been extended till early June. Schools and most businesses are shut. We've been told to stay home, stay right at home. And we managed to self-isolate with the help of technology, a range of what we call hero technologies, from video conferencing platforms scaling up to cater to new demands, to manufacturers pivoting to produce PPE. Technology has pretty much been front and center. It's been key to surviving this pandemic. Now, one company that's been on the front line is Grab. For those uninitiated, Grab is a ride-hailing unicorn operating in Southeast Asia. And at this point, I'd like to bring in Hui Ling Tan. She's co-founder of Grab. Ling, always good to have you with us.
Hey, everyone.
Now, Ling, we know that Grab's embarked on many initiatives, including deploying its drivers to fill the gaps in the healthcare ecosystem. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, thanks for calling this out. So a bit of context, as Haslinda mentioned earlier, that when Grab first started, we were known as a transportation platform that everybody relied on for day-to-day transportation. And now with COVID out there, if you go to the cities that used to be known for traffic jams, right, like Jakarta, like Manila, like Bangkok, each of those cities, the streets are empty right now. So we wanted to help make sure that 2 things were happening. One, we could help our drivers still sustain a livelihood, because empty roads translate to drastically impacted earnings for them. At the same time, we were also noticing some very interesting trends when COVID was starting to evolve during the early stages. For example, in Singapore, our teams actually were starting to notice on social media that our everyday heroes, our healthcare workers, they were starting to get shunned on public transportation, because they usually go in, nurses and doctors, with their scrubs, right, or their gowns. And it used to be perfectly fine, but overnight, suddenly people were distancing themselves from them, looking at them strangely, and we said, hey, this is not how we should be treating the heroes who are really literally spending their lives trying to save ours, right, risking their lives trying to save ours. So I think overnight, the team brainstormed and they said, hey, how can we help? And amazingly, in I think a course of like 72 hours, 3 days, they set up a new unit called Grab Care, which is a dedicated transportation service for healthcare professionals, where they asked the driver community, hey, how many of you would like to help? right? A few thousand signed up. We have 10,000 in Singapore right now. We also have, the same service in Indonesia and as well as Thailand, where these drivers are offering 24/7 services to our nurses, our doctors, our specialists, so that they don't have to deal with this social stigma right now. And so that's one real example from our end. And the second one I'll say also, which is actually driven in partnership with Ministry of Health, right? They realized as well that there were a bunch of COVID suspected cases. And for these individuals, we wanted to make sure these could still go to clinics, to the hospitals for testing as well. But ambulance services, public transportation, ambulances were stretched, public transportation was being shut down. How do you bridge that demand? So we set up Grab Response to, specially trained a bunch of drivers who said, again, they want to help. They're willing to equally put their lives at risk to shuttle the suspect COVID cases to and from hospitals and clinics. So these are some of the little things that we think are simple, but also possible because of technology and in the operational know-how that we have to try and really just say thank you. Thank you to the amazing individuals out there, because I strongly believe without them, we'd be in a much worse position.
It's pretty much being willing to adapt, staying nimble. Ling, we have a question here from a participant in China. The question is, what could Grab have done better to prepare for the COVID outbreak?
This is a great big question. There's one thing that we have been discussing as a leadership team around what could we have done once we started hearing about the COVID cases in China. To be honest, part of us, and I'll say myself, when I first started hearing about the cases, part of me was saying, hey, this is probably a local issue in China. It won't become a global issue. It won't come to Southeast Asia. Or if it did, it would take more time. And it wouldn't turn around overnight like it did topsy-turvy as we did. So with that in mind, I wish we could have done different things, like help move over our drivers, our transport drivers to our food delivery network faster. Help build out our GrabMart services and bring on more merchants even faster. Let me give you some specifics on that. So now that COVID is fully running or wreaking its havoc on us right now, we've helped our drivers who have lost their livelihoods. We brought about like 100,000 Grab car drivers in Malaysia and regionally as well to shift from pure transport services to actually give them opportunities to deliver food and deliver parcels and other day-to-day groceries as well. So about 20 to 25% of all of our food deliveries in Malaysia right now is actually sustained by Grab car drivers. And if we had known COVID was coming, we would have created this cross-platform opportunity earlier. On the merchant side as well, there's an interesting stat that I'm now more familiar with, that in Southeast Asia, to date, probably only about 15% of SMEs were digitally present. And if you can imagine post-COVID, when foot traffic fell to zero, what used to be a sustainable business model with lots of customers suddenly became, no revenue for merchants overnight. So I wish, if hindsight 2020, we had expanded our services and brought more and more merchants onto our delivery platform, offering them contactless payments earlier and offering them the ability to try grab food and GrabMart earlier. Things that we are now doing. But again,
it's strange to be talking about silver linings, but there are silver linings amid this whole pandemic. I mean, one of the silver linings is actually digitization of old ecosystems, and Grab has supported this initiative.
Yeah, so it's a really difficult time. So it's strange to call it. I wouldn't call it a silver lining, but I'll call it us as a human race really trying to adapt. At an individual level with our families, with the governments, right? So specifically for bringing traditional businesses online, I'll share an interesting set of examples for how our different local countries are doing it. Going back to Malaysia again. You guys are probably familiar with wet markets, the places we love to go to for fresh foods, poultry, fish, vegetables, your daily needs, right? When COVID hit, the picture that you have right now, right? All of that went, again, to zero. And these businesses that had no digital presence before and never had a need to, right? Because they were doing perfectly well before that. Suddenly, like, it was like doomsday for them. So when we realized there were two things happening, these merchants desperately needing a way to find alternative livelihoods or ways to sustain themselves. And us human everyday consumers being stuck at home on lockdown, not being able to go out and get food. How could we bring these pasas, these markets, online? We brought like big, large markets, wet markets. We also brought like Ramadan bazaars. I'm not sure if you're familiar, Hassan, you probably are. It's the fasting month right now, so our Muslim friends, colleagues, one of the things that we used to love were these bazaars that used to happen just before break fasting time. Amazing, displays of food. People went there with families and friends. Again, these annual events and this source of break fasting food suddenly also had no access to customers, and also we brought them online. So it was really interesting because none of these businesses really had any need to go digital before, right? And so, like Newton's first law of physics, any object usually doesn't move or change direction unless there's an external force on it. So in some ways, COVID has accelerated change. COVID has accelerated digitalization. I do apologize, especially for the more traditional businesses.
Grab has been ranked number 2 among the world's 50 most innovative companies. I mean, what that actually translates to is that Grab has more innovation than the big boys, the likes of Alibaba, the likes of Apple. Has Grab seen, we talked about that acceleration of innovation. Has Grab seen that within the company amid this pandemic? Often a crisis forces us to innovate, to think out of the box. How has Grab done that?
I don't know if it's driven by COVID specifically, but I think the one thing I really truly appreciate and cherish about the teams and Grab is that we get to work with every single day is we're constantly thinking about what are the problems that our customers and partners are facing, and how do we provide them a service. And those problems are constantly changing. If you looked at the history of our company over the last 7-8 years, we're constantly trying to figure out what's the next big problem, what's the next big problem. So if and when COVID hit, it clearly became everybody's biggest problems. So that's what drove us to say, okay, clearly all the plans before we had, they were good, they were great, we are executing them well, but let's relook at them because the future, the new normal, may be changing. The current needs clearly are also very different. So we redirected, drivers, merchants, from transportation to food to groceries. We're growing out Grab Mart as well, and we also started reaching out to different, government partners to see how we could support them during this time, either via healthcare initiatives or even by helping them understand what's the economic impact on their respective cities. Because clearly nobody knows what's going to be happening right now. We're trying to use the latest data to project going forward.
How do you see this crisis shaping, I guess, the future of transportation?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. Haslinda, that's one, to be honest, that we're also trying to look into. There will be changes. Exactly how big they are and how long they will last for, don't exactly know. And, I can make a lot of different projections right now. But what I've learned, particularly from COVID, is that to expect the unexpected. Folks are clearly going to care a lot more about safety, from a health perspective, and that's thankfully something that we've always cared for. So, just for example, while COVID was happening, and as our transport services are still in operations in certain cities, we've actually been distributing up to a million face masks or hand sanitizers to different drivers, right? Because we know that our customers care about that, our drivers care about that as well. So how do we help support them with that? In Vietnam as well, the team, amazing. They started innovating on, helping to develop additional barriers or face masks or in the cars, plexiglass and things like that to increase or decrease the potential transmission of COVID. So we will likely see the need for more of these health and safety related initiatives. We don't see the need for transport, disappearing overnight. Clearly, more folks are more comfortable working from home. But net, once all the lockdowns have actually been released, it's going to be an interesting observation to see how different countries and different customer segments also progress.
Ling, there is another question from a participant in the UK, and the question is, what are your greatest concerns about hero technologies and AI? I mean, there's always the issue of privacy. I suppose that's one.
Yeah. My biggest concern, I can't speak for other companies, but my biggest concern for Grab and what, Anthony, my co-founder, our leadership team, we always talk about is that we forget to listen to our customers, and we forget to innovate, we forget to adapt, right? We forget to change our products and services to the most important current needs. So whether it's safety and healthcare right now, or privacy that we're constantly thinking about as well, it's going to evolve with time because we're humans. We're reacting to external changes, but we're also social. So we're reacting to what our friends and the community is thinking. As long as we stay with our ears close to the ground, and secondly, super importantly, with the constant principle of trying to serve our customers in the best way possible, I hope and have faith that we will be able to continue adding value and doing good stuff. But we need to make sure that DNA stays consistent, and we continue to stay humble and look also at ourselves with the mirror as well, and talk to customers, reach out to them, and react and adapt to their feedback.
Ling, another question here. Are you offering money to furloughed drivers or the ones with no business at all? Are you offering any kind of assistance?
So we've actually set up a $40 million partner fund to help with different drivers in different countries as well. And for this, it goes into things like the face mask sanitizers that I talked about. It also goes into healthcare packages for drivers who unfortunately get affected by COVID, because we want to make sure that they focus on getting well rather than worry about when they can go back on the road and put themselves and others at risk. So there are packages like that, and in different countries, we've been supporting different drivers directly and indirectly.
Ling, on a more personal note, I mean, this question is for you. What has been the biggest challenge for you amid this pandemic, both as a leader and personally?
Trying to keep the team together and engaged virtually. Right. I think that's a difficult thing. We've gotten into a new norm now. And by the way, thanks to Zoom, so thankful that we have video conferencing facilities right now that
So Zoom has
enable
become
all this
the
to
sunset for
happen.
you, Ling.
It's funny, actually, Haslinda. I didn't know you guys were going to put the four options there. Out of all the four, the only thing that we're not part of or helping and able to support is video conferencing, because food deliveries, contactless payments, and of course, telemedicine with our partnership with Ping An, the doctor. Those are the three things that we've actually seen as current trends that will may evolve into long-term changes as well. So video conferencing, I'm very thankful to all of our technology partners out there, because you've enabled us to continue supporting our grabbers and our customers as well.
Ling, always a pleasure to have
So,
you
yeah.
as part of the whole conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Hui Ling Tan, co-founder of Grab there. Now, at this point, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Peter Elstrom is Bloomberg's executive editor of Technology Asia, and he's led the region's coverage of this coronavirus pandemic. Peter joins us from the city of Tokyo. Peter, I mean, we talk about how tech is playing a big role in tracking and testing and finding a virus. Where has technology been most successful in our coverage of this pandemic? It does look like I think we're having some technical issues in this technical conference, but just bear with us while we sort out the difficulties. Peter, let's try to reconnect. Are you able to hear me and are you able to speak to us? Well, let's while we wait to reconnect with Peter, let's do a question, a polling question. Now, the pandemic has exposed how wide the digital divide is in the world. Take a guess. How many people in the world don't have access to the internet? How many people in the world do not have access to the internet? And you have a choice of A, 500 million, B, 2 billion, C, 4 billion. Right now, most of you think that it is 4 billion. That's how many people in the world don't have access to the internet. We'll give you the answer slightly later. Now, before we'll work on getting Peter back from Tokyo. For now, let's perhaps move on to our panel discussion. We talked about how companies like Grab are stepping up. Other companies are also doing the same to navigate through this new reality. At this point, I'd like to invite three special guests to talk to us about their innovation success stories and how they think we will kickstart the new post-virus economy. I'm so glad to be introducing Ruth McEe, McLaren Automotive Executive Director for Commercial and Legal. Zeming Soon is JD.com Southeast Asia President. And we also have Li Meng, Razer Chief Strategy Officer and FinTech CEO. Thank you so much for joining us. Ruth, the first question comes to you. We know that the UK was desperately looking for ventilators and it needed something like 30,000 more within weeks. And McLaren answered that call, that ventilators challenge. How did McLaren switch from cars and engines to ventilators so quickly?
Good morning from London, and thanks for having me as part of the panel. Well, McLaren is involved, as you said, in the Ventilator Challenge UK Consortium, which is a consortium of businesses from industrial, engineering and technology companies, and primarily from aerospace, automotive and medical businesses, who've come together, as you said, to answer the call of the National Health System here in the UK for additional ventilators to help fight COVID-19. In terms of McLaren's involvement, we are involved in designing parts, in using our skills in rapid prototyping to manufacture parts and trolleys, and to design and manufacture test boxes for the ventilators, which will ultimately end up and are ending up within the NHS hospitals. In terms of our ability to move this very quickly, that is what McLaren, from both our Formula One team and our automotive business, is renowned for. We move very fast, both on the road and track, but also in relation to how we develop things and how we produce things. So making this change for us was actually, it was part of our DNA. It was something that we were able to do, and we're genuinely very proud to have been able to play our part in helping the NHS.
And Li Meng, Razer did the same. I mean, it is a gaming hardware company, but it pivoted to mass production. How difficult was that? How did you do that within 24 days?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think when we looked at the situation brewing in China, because we have offices there, right at the get-go, we thought to ourselves, if this becomes a global thing, we thought about our staff first. We have 1,300 plus staff globally. So we started looking at sourcing for masks right at the get-go, converting our lines in China to produce some of the masks. And obviously we made a call to donate 1 million masks to friends, partners, frontliners. But as the situation evolved, we then said, hey, it looks like there could be a severe shortage of the mask globally. And we wanted to make sure that, at least in Singapore, where we're headquartered, that some form of domestic line to produce the mask as a supplementary to what the government is doing would be something that would be good for the country. We then literally just scrambled and looked for the machinery, the raw materials, We literally had to air freight them instead of putting them on containers, just so that we can get things going. I think the team is extremely proud. We thought we could do it in 30 days, and we actually got it done in 24 days. So again, same as McLaren, it is in our DNA to move really, really fast, and that's where we are.
You just have to make sure that you have the right DNA. Sometimes you just can't help that. Let's bring you into the conversation, Zheming. JD.com. I mean, e-commerce has been front and center. Everybody went digital. They were forced to be. How has the e-commerce space adapted and reacted to COVID-19?
Well, first and foremost, we absolutely focus on serving our customer even when there's a lot of pressure on the supply chain. So in China, even in early February, when the COVID crisis was really at the height, I think especially in Wuhan and Hubei, our supply chain capability allow us to still deliver on the same day or the next day. And actually, the technologies involved is not just the drones or the autonomous delivery robots. It's really about the ability to predict where the supplies are, where the demands are coming from, especially in daily necessity, as you can imagine, because people are stuck at home. And then working upstream with our manufacturers, suppliers, to make sure that they are upscaling their production and then putting the right product at the right place through the different warehouses because we own the logistical network in China. So it's all about making sure that we are able to work with the suppliers, produce the product, and then being able to bring it to the people, even though during that time there was obviously a clampdown on travel and restriction. But because our delivery people has been with us for many years, some of them, and they actually are trusted by the residents. So the element of trust was really important. The resident trust the courier, the delivery person to bring the goods to their places. And that's really kind of the main crux of it. So beyond just technology, it's also about trust.
Speaking of trust, there is a question here from the UK. We thank you for joining us. I know it's so early because Ruth just informed us that it is about, 6, 7 in the morning there. Now, the question is, ethical use of AI will be extremely important given the crisis will lead to a loss of jobs and increasing need for automation. How do we keep that balance? How do we keep that balance between tapping AI, ensuring that we keep up to speed with technology, but balancing it with the loss of jobs? Ruth, perhaps you can take this question.
I think from McLaren's perspective, this is actually not a new topic for us. So McLaren obviously operates in a very high technology, highly innovative, fast moving environment, both in Formula One and in our automotive division. And if I just look at what we do within the automotive division, we produce some of the most highly technological, highly innovative, fastest cars in the market. And each of those cars, despite the fact that they actually contain levels of engineering and technology that in certain instances are the first time these technologies have ever appeared on the market, they're hand built because there are things that you just cannot replace with machines and with AI. And I would be optimistic, as we're seeing with the use of technology and how it's supporting businesses through this crisis with the new norms in how we work, the use of AI should become very complementary to what businesses do and what businesses deliver. And yes, while there may be a slight rebalance, if things are, as I said, retained in a complementary fashion, it should benefit everybody in the medium to long term.
And Zheming, the e-commerce space, I mean, it uses AI in a huge way. What's your take on it?
Well, I think it's complementary. I'll give you an example. JD doesn't only just operate on retail supply chain, but we also have a capability called JD Health. And actually, JD Health provides medical consulting services online by doctors, especially in China. And we also complement our capabilities of with the offline pharmacies to able to deliver within 30 minutes. So even though things are online, things are automated, but we still work closely with offline stores, offline pharmacies to ensure that the medical products are actually delivered not on just the same day, but even within 30 minutes. Another very specific example is that we have millions of interaction with customers because the 360 million yearly active users who obviously call us for customer service purposes. Our ability to understand syntax and analysis actually enable us to quickly deploy smart assistant with the local government of Wuhan to answer a lot of COVID-related questions. And actually, this capability has been used by our clients in over 50 cities and answering more than 2 million inquiries. And these capabilities also, obviously, at the end of the day, still flows into the more complex, complicated question, still flows into people who are answering the question, answering the call, allowing them to provide more value-added services rather than answering the basic questions. So actually, AI and people working together are really powerful. And even a specific example, and the last example is that we have obviously delivery robots that can deliver up to, together with our courier, 2,000 packages a day within a 5-kilometer radius. Each run is only 30 packages, but complementary with our delivery people, they can actually upscale their capabilities. So I see it as an opportunity for us to really maximize the capabilities and the efforts of the people who are working rather than just replacing them.
Li Mei, we know that Razer has set aside about 50 million US dollars to support fintech companies dedicated to fighting COVID-19. What kind of technologies are emerging? What kind of technologies are exciting to you right now?
Well, I guess a couple of things that, I think just coming from the gaming side of things first. Obviously, over COVID-19 emerging, we saw a lot of interactions moving from offline to online. We obviously have a huge global presence from online engagements perspective from the gaming side. So it's one of those things where when you think about new technology, whether it's digital payments, it is AR, VR, it's and all that, the tendency of the guys who pick it up and learn and use it first are usually the gamers, right? The guys who spend a lot of time in the digital world. So obviously things like video conferencing or even hardware side where my video cam that puts the natural light on my face and all that, those kind of things we start to see a lot of usage from our users, and obviously how we then push it out to the guys who actually need it. So in terms of technology, we are always at the forefront. If we go back to the question around data and AI, the relevance going back to fintech then is also in line with why we decided to do this new business segment, right? Because we are seeing a lot of people using our systems to do transactions, people using that to buy game credits or even doing offline side from our e-wallet. Um, Things like that, as you try to then customize solutions that are actually reflective of what people want, you actually do need that data. If not, you are always kind of seen to be pushing something that you are trying to tell the users it's good for you, but it may not be necessary that way. So I think it's complementary, but as we go along with that, we are also very cognizant about data protection and privacy issues. We are, again, 16 offices worldwide, so we watch this very, very carefully across the globe on how we kind of proceed as we bring in new technologies like AI.
I just want to bring our participants up to speed on the polling question which we posed earlier. The pandemic has exposed how wide the digital divide is in the world. How many people in the world don't have access to the internet right now? We have 6% saying it's 500 million. We have 53% saying it's 2 billion. And we have 40% saying it's 4 billion. We'll keep that polling question slightly longer, and we'll give you the results just momentarily. Ruth, if we can just carry on the conversation. When we talk about innovation helping us through this pandemic, for McLaren, where is innovation most apparent?
I think one of the elements that I'm sure has been experienced not just within McLaren but across all industries and businesses is the rapid adoption of remote working out of necessity, but how quickly people have been able to start using the technology, but also the fact that the technology is rapidly evolving as people's needs evolve as we get more used to this remote working. So from McLaren's perspective, we have over 4,000 people in our workforce. And on the 12th of March, we asked all of our office-based staff to work from home. And that was literally a mass movement of people out of an office-based environment to their homes. And what I've been very impressed and really amazed by is, as I said, the ability of people to adapt to this new way of working, but really the ability of the technology to support that way of working. And I think we are probably on the verge of something very different in terms of the new normal and the way the technology will evolve again, as I said, as we evolve as people to this new way of operating and working.
There is a question here from a participant in the US. The question is, as wars spur new civilian tech and industrial applications, so will COVID-19. In which ways, in what ways will that take place? The question, as wars spur new civilian tech and industrial applications, so will COVID-19. How so? Li Meng.
Sure. So again, I see it from different parts of the business. One, from the gaming side, I think the activity that we've seen come online and through live streaming platforms or gaming has literally shot up. So I think that part of the kind of culture or habits is probably going to continue. We have seen closet gamers coming out and starting to spend time playing games and all that. So I think the advancement in the gaming side, I think it will spur things like 5G cloud gaming even faster as people want better experiences. Then obviously when you look at it from my fintech side of things, the e-commerce transactions, the online payments, the contactless payments, which to be honest, different countries were moving at different speeds, but because of the lockdown where people couldn't go to retail stores to buy things, they are spending more time buying things online. They are going to even if they can go to offline points, they realize that cash is dirty to a certain extent, and they rather use the contactless payment. So I see that both sides really continuing to be a norm for most people out there. I think work from home, live conferencing, and all that is also becoming a norm.
Zheng,
And the
your
experience
thoughts
will
on
just
that?
be improved along the way.
Right. Zheng, your thoughts on how that will play out?
I think it will continue to accelerate a lot of what JD has already done. I think in supply chain management, for example, in the last mile delivery, we have been using drones since 2016, and for the past few years, drones has been used to deliver to remote sites. So, for example, during the COVID situation at the Bayam Lake in Hubei province, the route to the drop-off point near the village was closed because of the river route, the water route. And instead of routing another 100 kilometers by 2-3 hours, the drone was able to just fly across the lake and then deliver to the pickup point in 10 minutes time. But of course, with the permission of the local governments. So drones will definitely, I think, accelerate the use in different parts of the world, especially in China, with the in partnership with the local governments to deliver to a pickup drop-off point where then the courier can then deliver door to door. I think that's just one specific example. I think the second example which we can see that will accelerate the innovation so far is the use of in terms of retail, not just online. So of course we are working even in Thailand and Indonesia, we are working with a lot of local sellers to get online through helping them to waive the commission, helping them to get online. But even in China, we are working with, let's say, five-star appliance stores, which are selling over 700 stores, and there are logistical nodes whereby we can actually deliver products from their shops to the nearby customers, even though they can buy online. So the integration of offline and online retail will continue to accelerate, especially as people demand faster and more reliable delivery. So I just think that this will continue to grow and continue to accelerate.
There's a question here from audience Q, and I'd like to direct it to Ruth. The question is, what will be the biggest habitual or mindset change out of COVID-19? How will it affect travel, healthcare, retail? I guess, how will it affect consumer behavior in your view?
I think there's two elements to change that I think are going to happen. One that will happen with consumer behaviour, but before I address that, just in terms of how I think industry is going to behave. If we look at how McLaren and the Ventilator Challenge UK consortium have been interacting with each other, I mean, we've seen an example of companies from very different industries coming together to work with one another to kind of answer a common problem and achieve a common goal. What we've also seen in reality is competitors, people who generally compete with one another, coming together to pool their resource, to pool their knowledge, to produce something that is required. And I think that we will see a shift towards a more collaborative approach across industry, but also within sectors themselves as we move forward to drive technology faster and quicker and to be more innovative. In terms of consumer behaviour, I think that's the big question, and that's one of the challenges that we all face as businesses. The world hasn't seen a pandemic like this and the economic consequences that the world is facing as a result of the pandemic before, and trying to predict how that will affect the consumer market and the world far into the future, I think is really the unanswered question, and is something that we're all trying to work towards answering. Certainly from McLaren's perspective, we are seeing as the retail markets begin to reopen, in particular in Asia, that the demand for our vehicles is picking up. We are back selling cars in Asia, but how quickly that's going to happen in the rest of the world as Europe and the US starts to reopen, we just don't know. We're very optimistic, but I think like everybody, it's if somebody knows the answer, let us know so we can plan for it.
We know that in China, for instance, online music events have attracted millions and millions of people. There are changes for the entertainment industry as well. I want to pose this question to Li Ming. I mean, we know Razer has hosted online parties that are called cloud raves. I personally have not attended that. Maybe I will at some point. Talk to us about how you see behaviors changing in the entertainment space, in the gaming space.
Sure. So again, it goes back to how live streaming and stuff has started, particularly in China. So you're right. In China, you saw millions happening, right? And as the lockdown happens, whether it's concerts, nightclubs, I think it would stick because we are literally seeing, from the get-go of the event when we did our first cloud clubbing event, we saw the numbers really, really increase over time. You're also then starting to see musicians and all that doing live streaming concerts.
We're kind of losing connection with Li Ming at the moment. We'll try and sort that out. Li Ming, in the meantime, maybe you can try to reconnect to the line as well. On that note, though, Ruth, would you go online? Would you go to a virtual party? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I'm just wondering how attractive an idea that is post-COVID.
I think there's two elements to it. On a personal basis, like most of the world, the way we're all staying connected to one another is actually via computers. So looking at computer screens and using apps like Teams or Zoom to connect is what people are doing. And it will be interesting to see whether that is a trend that will continue when we get back to a world where social distancing isn't a requirement. One of the things that we've certainly seen, though, in particular in our retail side of the business, is a real move towards online selling. So as dealerships have been closed because of various lockdown restrictions in the global markets, our dealers have moved very much towards engaging online with customers, be it by having virtual dealerships or allowing people to virtually spec their cars online. So that has actually introduced a whole new dimension to how we as an organisation interact with our customers. And I do see, like our earlier question, I do see that becoming quite complementary to the face-to-face, person-to-person type environment that we were used to. So I think that a lot of these new norms will stick. but that they will stick in parallel to kind of the old way that we also had of working and engaging.
Ruth, very quickly, there was a question specifically for you, and it's, what does McLaren see evolving in its core business, which is automobiles? Will McLaren move away from that?
From cars, no. So I think what we will see, though, is we will see the technologies continuing to evolve. So as the world moves towards hybrid powertrains and then towards electrification, we'll see different offerings in the car market. But for us, our primary business is automotive and is the production of supercars. And it is something that we believe there's a long-term demand there for. What we are exploring and have actively done over the years as part of our McLaren Applied business is looking to see how the technologies that we create and use within Formula One and within automotive can be applied in other industries and other sectors. And as we've been involved in this Ventilator Challenge UK project, and as we see the collaborations happening across industry, I do think that for us as a business, the application of our technology beyond the automotive space and beyond the Formula One space will become more and more relevant. And I think there's going to be some very interesting discussions and partnerships which will arise as a result of that new way of thinking. But yeah, we will make ours.
I am confident that you're not straying away from your core business. Now, as we wrap up, I'd like to pose this question to all our speakers. I mean, when you take a look at COVID-19, what's been the most challenging part for you personally? And should we go through the next pandemic, what would you do differently? Zeming, perhaps we can start with you.
Well, for me personally, it's the inability to really visit my teams in markets. So that's always a challenge, being a leader and being responsible for the business. But in terms of what we could do differently, I think in Southeast Asia, we have the fortunate to be able to learn from what happened in China. So we did manage to plan in advance in terms of the supply chain, focusing on the products and the necessity that the people will need during this time. We also, for example, managed the increased demand of goods, even though we have more restricted delivery capabilities because of the capacity. But we partner with, for example, in Indonesia with Bloomberg Taxi Group, and in Thailand we might partner with other players to make sure that we deliver the product still at the right speed and in a reliable fashion to our customers, especially since many of them are not able to go out at this time. And I think we'll continue to accelerate the way that we use our technologies, AI, big data, drones, autonomous robots, and also advancement in our supply chain to continue to just drive more reliable delivery of products and also at the right timing to our customers, regardless of the situation they are facing.
Right. Li Meng?
Yes. So I guess the biggest personal challenge is I do look after a regional and a global business. So not being able to travel has been an issue because a lot of the interaction with the staff are live.
Personally,
obviously
though,
with
Li
the,
Meng, how has COVID-19 impacted you personally?
Personally, I think my kids and my family are getting used to me being at home a lot more. The bandwidth of the house is being affected, and that's why I was probably cut off earlier. Yeah, I mean, I do tend to believe that running a business personally and having the human interaction is still quite important. We're all kind of adapting to the new norm. Yeah, so I think it was a challenge at the start. But we actually did start with things like split teams and all that much more earlier, having seen what happened in China. So I think we kind of eased into it a lot easier and faster.
And you, Ruth?
I think I share the challenges that have already been expressed. I think there were two additional ones that on a personal level I've experienced. One is, I guess, is trying to lead a business in this environment of uncertainty, where certainly from a European perspective, this all happened very quickly, relatively speaking, and the uncertainty about when things will change and what's going to happen is challenging when you're trying to plan how to move a business forward. On a very personal level, trying to work from home and connect on video conferences with 3 young children who keep popping into the room to say hello, to see who's on the screen is a daily challenge. But one, thankfully, people are quite forgiving about.
Ruth, Nikki, McLaren Automotive, Zeming Soon, JD.com, Lee Liming, Reza. Thank you so much for your insights today. It's been very, very interesting having your thoughts on the conversation that we're having today. Now, at this point, I'd like to give it another attempt. Introduce our next speaker, Peter Elstrom is Bloomberg's Executive Editor of Technology Asia. He leads the region's coverage of the coronavirus pandemic. Peter joins us from Tokyo. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Heslinda. Can you hear me okay this time?
We have you. Now, we talk about tech playing a role.
Wonderful.
We talk about tech playing a role in the tracking and the testing and, in the search for this vaccine for COVID-19. Where has tech been most successful when you consider the coverage that we've done in Asia?
Well, obviously, there are a lot of challenges, and you see on the healthcare side, companies jumping in with innovations very, very quickly, looking for treatments, of course, for the coronavirus, and then also at some point a vaccine. And we've seen some developments towards that, at least. Bill Gates in particular has been pretty optimistic about it. On the information technology side, you've seen a lot of these business leaders get very actively involved, trying to do things for their local communities and also trying to marshal the resources of their businesses to be able to make some sort of contribution. Some of this is very basic. You see for Hanhai in particular, the company that does a lot of the manufacturing for Apple, they quickly retooled some of their manufacturing lines so that they could produce ventilators because there was such a shortage around the world. And they moved pretty quickly. They were also making masks. You see people jump in to help with the protective equipment. One of the high hopes is that the IT companies are going to be able to help with tracking down the virus and helping to slow down the spread, if not stop the spread altogether. So you've heard a lot of developments among apps for contact tracing. And contact tracing, as people in the healthcare profession know, is really labor intensive. They have been using it since the 1930s to track how diseases are spread between different populations, and it takes a lot of people. It's really trained professionals who have to go out and interview people one-on-one to find out where these people went before they got something like measles or tuberculosis and find out how they could have spread it, who they interacted with, and in what kind of ways. So now what you're seeing, particularly for the tech companies, is they're jumping in, trying to develop apps that will help speed up this contact tracing in a number of ways. And they're in Singapore, actually. You saw one of the fastest efforts. A bunch of engineers jumped in and they put together an app that apparently works pretty well for tracing where people go. China, of course, was very aggressive. Ruth mentioned these unusual alliances that you see. Apple and Google, which are sort of sworn enemies in most fields, decided that they were going to collaborate with their mobile technologies to try to develop an app that would help governments around the world track people who have the virus and how they possibly would spread it. Now, there are a lot of privacy concerns too. So those issues need to be addressed as these tech companies come up with these new applications.
Right. Peter, there's a question from a participant in France. Do you think COVID-19 is a game changer regarding digital transformation? We only talked about an acceleration, but is it a game changer?
Well, it's certainly changing all of our lives, both professionally and personally. So we see that on a number of different fronts. Somebody mentioned the importance of video conferencing. Yes, of course, we had all used it before, but not the way that we had done it now. We've never done one of these events, as you mentioned. So yeah, it's certainly changing the landscape for tech companies around the world. I mean, they're trying to figure out how to deal with it. And you see it in every segment, really, of the development process. One of the companies, of course, we write about a lot is Apple. They do most of their manufacturing in China. Typically, when they're coming out with a new iPhone, which they do regularly every fall, they need to send their engineers physically from California to China to be able to work with the Hanhai engineers on how they're going to design the phone and then realize those designs in their manufacturing process. A lot of those things you just can't do anymore. So our Apple team has been reporting on that, and the Apple engineers are figuring out alternatives to be able to do this in a new kind of way. So it's certainly difficult, and it's a challenge from a design perspective, even for a company as distinguished as Apple. But of course, there are certain things that you just can't do unless there's a physical presence, like manufacture phones or produce food and all sorts of things in the supply chains.
Peter, the share price of tech giants in Silicon Valley have surged. I mean, investors are pretty much betting that they will emerge from the crisis stronger. When it comes to virus innovation, though, has Silicon Valley been at the heart of tech fighting the virus?
Well, that's a really good question. I think the healthcare companies are really taking the lead in terms of developing the treatments and then also the vaccines. You've seen a lot of energy and a lot of money go into that effort, not just in the United States, but well beyond it too. The IT companies, I think, are working to try to help, and you see many of the business leaders jump in. Here in Japan, SoftBank's founder Masayoshi Son has tried to help by getting masks and ventilators and other sorts of things. So they are playing a role, but information technology can only take you so far, I think, in addressing this pandemic. And a lot of what's happening is happening on the healthcare front. So IT companies are working, and they still have a lot of work to do, both in terms of the figuring out how they're going to go back to work, how they're going to produce, and then what kinds of solutions they can offer along the way.
What's also interesting is that we have different country models in addressing the virus. I want to, rightly or wrongly, Asia versus the West. Different economies are tapping into tech very differently. We have Hong Kong, Singapore using those tracking apps to monitor movements, but not really happening in the US or Europe. What's your take on that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's another very good question. And there are questions about why it's sort of spread more rapidly in different countries and in others. In China, of course, you had the outbreak initially, and then you had government regulations that require people to download apps and have QR codes on their phone. I think, as most people know, there are color-coded apps that you need to show to be able to determine where you can go within China. You need to be able to get clearance to actually go into different places. I think in Singapore also they've been quite strict. I think South Korea has used the data available through their wireless carriers and financial transactions to be able to track people pretty effectively. When you move to the West, in the US and beyond the US, you have privacy concerns that make people resistant to using these kinds of technologies. And these contact tracing apps, as we've been talking about, only work if you have a very high percentage of the population using them. So when Apple and Google are developing these apps, they're trying to use them to track people and figure out exactly where they've gone, they need to get people to download the apps or install the apps in some sort of way and agree to those privacy concerns. And those are not easy things to do. And you need to do it kind of quickly because the disease is spreading, the virus is spreading right now very, very rapidly. In contrast, we just did a story about at Hong Kong airport, if you land now, they're going to take a swab from you right when you land as you come into the country. And there's no option to take this. You sort of have to. And then they're going to test you for either being positive for the virus or not positive for the virus, but they're going to have that swab from you no matter what. And there's there's not the same kind of privacy protections that you would have in other places.
I'd just like to bring up the polling question, which has to do with privacy. Are you willing to trade your privacy for public safety? And so far we have 18% saying yes, 9% saying no, 72% saying depends on how data is used. And that is it. How do you ensure that data remains private. Now, Peter, there's one issue as well. I mean, it's funny because everybody's weighing in on it. We have that clash between the tech titans, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. They disagree on the US shutdown. Musk against it. He tweeted madly about it. And Zuckerberg says a rush to normality is really a bad idea. So what's really behind Musk's hysteria? Has it got to do with the fact that, Facebook employees can work from home and Tesla's employees can't? Is it about future earnings? What's it about?
Yeah, this is the big question. As somebody described it, it's a matter of balancing lives and livelihoods. You need to be able to keep your economy operating. People need to be able to have jobs and earn a living. And I think Elon Musk is giving voice to the side that we have worked very hard at flattening the curve, as they describe it, and trying to minimize the spread of these infections. But you also need to let people go back to work at some point. They need to make a living. There are many people who need to be physically present to be able to make money through their jobs, and so there does need to be that kind of balance. And so the trade-off, I mean, to get back to the point about the trade-off with privacy, what you can imagine is that governments that were creative about this and sensitive to these privacy concerns would perhaps offer to people that if they were willing to download apps that would track them or stop in for medical checkups once a week or once every other week, you would be able to let people leave their homes and go physically back to their jobs sooner if you're willing to trade off some of the privacy protections that you would otherwise not have. And these are challenges for governments around the world. They're trying to figure out how to do this and how to do it effectively. They all want to let people get back to work, let their kids go back to school, like so many of us really, really want. And in order to do that, they need to figure out some method for doing it. And it's a slow process. I think in a lot of cases, it's not the federal governments that are making these decisions, but the local governments, because they're a little bit closer to the situation. We'll see how that evolves over time.
So lots of questions to be answered. Peter Elstrom, Bloomberg's own Peter Elstrom. Thank you so much for that. Well, that about does it, and it comes to a conclusion. Thank you so much for joining this special episode of Sooner Than You Think. We hope you've enjoyed the discussions. We do welcome your feedback. Please do our exit survey, which will appear on your screen at the end of it. We'd love to hear from you to get feedback to see how this can be done better the next time. Thanks again to our speakers, and thank you for being such an engaged audience. For ongoing COVID-19 coverage and other stories, please do go to Bloomberg.com and follow Bloomberg on Twitter @business. Thank you. Stay safe. Stay well. See you next time.